Hey YouTube, this is Emperor Jeanne here, joined with my friend Dandy Dragon and very special guest. And as you might have guessed from the title and from this beautiful tier maker list that we have in front of us, today we are going to be making a tier list of what we think are the best and worst free-for-all civs in Age of Empires 4.
That is correct. And let us note here, first and foremost, that this is opinion based, and there is math and the trials that we have done for each of these civs that back up our opinions, but those will be in future videos with each civ's individual deep dives.
Yes, Danny
And
and
we
I
are
spent about over 50 hours testing both the economies and the militaries of all 16 civs to come up with our opinions. But yeah, at the end of the day, they are just opinions. Another thing to note is that our ranking is going to be based on post-imperial age, since in a free-for-all setting, that's pretty reasonable to reach. And we're also going to be assuming that players are of roughly equal skill, since that makes too big of a difference to account for in this kind of a list.
for sure. So starting off, we have Abbasid, which is our host here, main civ as far as I'm aware, unless you've changed it on me.
They are still my first and greatest love. These days, I've been playing around a little bit more with Byzantines and Order of the Dragon, but the Abbasid will always be my favorite and the FFA civ that I go with if I'm trying to play a try-hard, sweaty FFA game, which, in my opinion, is an oxymoron. Now, you might be thinking Abbasid should suck in an FFA because they only have two landmarks. But what I would say is that their economy and their military both more than compensate for the fact that they only have the two landmarks available to them.
I'm right there with you. With the Abbasid, you have one of the best villager ecos. You have top two for their trade eco, allowing them to do either or. If there's trade, they can trade. If there's just a lot of nodes and no trade posts, they can still do well. When it comes to military, they have one of the best grinding potentials. They have counter cav, which is a big deal in FFA settings. And their only limitation they have is the fact they only have two landmarks, which if they can keep in a defensive position doesn't make a difference at all.
Right. Now, you are vulnerable to an early game landmark snipe. Unlike other civs, though, their Golden Age bonus makes them less vulnerable than other civs. And yeah, like you said, Dandy, the Abbasid can grind out units thanks to their ridiculously good economies. They have some of the best counter units available, other than like probably Malians. But at the end of the day, the two landmarks is still makes them kind of vulnerable once you've scouted out where the landmarks are. So even though they are my personal favorite civ, and even though they are one of the best, without the limitation of landmark snipe vulnerability, that is a huge limitation for them. And that is why I'm going to put them in the B tier for FFAs.
For sure. Right there with you.
Like, they are, as long as you can, if you can get into a good defensible position, they will be able to outtrade every civ in the game. But if you have any openings or vulnerabilities, then you are more vulnerable than any other civ to being landmark sniped. Which is a problem that they share with our next civilization, the Ayyubids. The big difference between the two is that Ayyubids are much better at hitting their maximum potential, thanks to what a lot of people in the community call the casino wing or the economic bazaar wing, allowing them to spend gold on either other resources or on villagers and traders. They also have pretty good raiding capacities, as well as strong siege.
Yep, I would agree. When it comes to siege units, they are one of the top tier. When it comes to early raids, they do that very efficiently. They do get their Golden Age bonus, which really does help with their gold and stone acclamations. So they can do well with the early aggression, with a bit of early eco, but it doesn't scale into the late game, sadly. They do not have any good food bonuses, they have no wood bonuses, really, to mention. And their military, while stronger than probably the Abbasid is on average, they do suffer from that eco, meaning that they cannot field that military near as well.
Exactly.
For me, yeah, they are probably at the they are down in the D tier as far as my opinion goes.
Yeah, I love the Ayyubid units. I think Tower of the Sultanate is a very strong battering ram, and it helps protect their ram spam very well. But like you said, their top eco is worse than basically every other endgame eco in the game at the moment. And while they will reach it very quick, it's not going to sustain them. And with the vulnerability to landmark sniping and the fact that it is so much harder to replace their military than it is for the Abbasid, I agree. They are a D tier civ, which is sad for me to say because I do really like the Ayyubids. I think their military is more fun to play with than the Abbasid. The Desert Raiders are just an awesome unit, but you can't replace them like you can with the Abbasid.
Yep.
And being able to quickly and efficiently replace your armies is more important in a late game FFA setting than having cool, good units.
Yep.
Next up is the Byzantines, and I think both of us have really been enjoying Byzantines, right?
Yep. They are probably in my top four favorite FFA civs. But sadly, as much as I think we both enjoy them, they do suffer from the old adage of win hard, lose hard.
I think also their biggest problem, like at least for me personally, is they are hard to play. Like they are, in my
Yes.
opinion, the most difficult civ in the game to actually play correctly right now. Because there are just so many moving pieces to the Byzantines. You need to
Yep.
optimize cisterns in order to play Byzantines effectively. You have to know how and where and when to use and harvest your olive oil income to play Byzantines correctly. You need to know what landmarks you want to build in order to play Byzantines correctly. And that all makes them really, really hard to properly execute. And especially with
Yep.
the cisterns, it makes expansion hard. And being able to expand well to harvest resources that are outside of your starting range, super important in an FFA
Yep.
setting.
Yeah. And on top of that, while they have probably one of the top three like most powerful armies in the game, they don't have the eco bonuses to really like get those armies out quickly, especially because with gold heavy armies, you tend to need gold heavy trade, which they get no true trade bonus. They get a little bit extra with olive oil, but that's not, anything close to the Ottomans or the Abbasids. So for me, with all that difficulty in mind, but with the strong military and their amazing defensive potential with their mangonel towers and stone towers and keeps, I would see them as a flat B tier civ for FFAs.
Yeah, I think B tier is the right place to put the Byzantines. It's definitely worth mentioning those Mangonel towers. That will keep you from all but the most dedicated of base attacks as Byzantines. Like Mangonel's able to crush infantry blobs, able to get rid of ram spams, which are one of the deadliest early game attacks. Really, they're one of the best siege attacks in the game, other than certain civs ranged
Yep.
attacks. But yeah, like it's good. It allows them to stay in the game for longer than similar civ would. It's just not enough to get them up into even A tier. Once I
Yep.
think that'll change once build orders get kind of more solved with Byzantines, once players figure out how to use them better. But at least for now, I don't think they can go anywhere higher than B.
Agreed.
Next up is China, who before the Byzantines were the most difficult civ to play and are still a pretty hard civ to pilot effectively without a lot of practice. But they are still a pretty strong civ.
Yep. I would say the biggest thing to note about them is the multiple landmarks they can place.
Mm-hmm.
Those landmarks are a saving grace in an FFA format where just even having one landmark alive keeps you in the game and you can always bounce back.
Yeah,
But on the issue that they suffer from, but is also one of their strengths, is their military. It is one of the strongest in the game. Nesta Bees being one of the best siege units in the game that they can get, and that gets kind of overshadowed though to some degree because of their gold cost. They do have some ways to get some decent passive gold, but it does not equal out the amount that they need for their siege.
yeah,
So they do take a lot of skill to use due to the complexity of the civ itself and the expensive nature of their armies.
yep. As long as you can secure gold, they will do fantastic. And it is actually fairly easy to secure gold as China. You've got you can build keeps faster than any other civ in the game, other than maybe Jushi, although I don't think that Jushi has the build bonuses that China does. Um, and yeah, with the supervisor, with the imperial official, I should say, supervising your gold nodes mining camp, you will be getting more gold per camp than or per node than any other civ. But yeah, once they start to run out of gold node access, once they are kind of forced into a more defensive posture, if they are forced into defenses, they're going to suffer from that lack of gold income. All of
Yep.
that said, though, like it's hard to stop a China once they get going. And while they are not going to perform economically on the same level as most as our other top tier civs, they still have a pretty good eco regardless, and their military more than justifies a spot in the A tier, in my opinion.
I'm right there with you. They are A tier through and through.
And with that, we have Delhi. Like Delhi. I think elephants are cool. I like their aesthetics, but you rarely see Delhi in FFA games. And I think the big reason is because they're just not very strong in FFA.
Yep. They have some really good tools that in situations can put them up to even some of the top tier civs for the fact, for instance, they don't need a lot of gold to get siege, and so much that their elephants are siege units. They have a very good men at arm castle age. They can compete for relics. They have a lot of good tools, but none of them pay off the same way some of these other civs do. Which means in FFAs they don't have as efficient of a win con. Is the best way I could describe it.
Yeah. Another big issue that Delhi has is for both feudal and imperial age, in an FFA setting, there is only one landmark to choose, and if you pick the wrong landmark, you are critically handicapping yourself. In an
Yep.
FFA, you need to pick Tower of Victory as your feudal age landmark to give your men at arms and hand cannons the DPS increase through their faster attack speed. And in the Imperial Age, you need to pick the Hisar Academy so that you can have a passive food income that frees up population space to allow you to field more men at arms and hand cannons than your opponents can, with equal economic income. They're a little more competitive in the Castle Age landmark. You can make arguments for both. Generally speaking, though, you will want the House of Learning to further improve their men at arms. And that the fact that you have that hard limiting factor of the landmarks to choose from hurts them. And there's also the fact that elephants are not cost efficient.
Yeah, they are, when in their prime position, so to speak, they are monsters. But if anyone is ready for them, they are hard countered very quickly, very easily. And without culverins, they cannot defend their men at arm blobs in the Imperial Age either. Which I would like to see them in B tier, but I think practically they are a D or a C tier civ.
Yeah, I think C tier is the place for Delhi. I think that it wouldn't take much to bump up Delhi to be a much better performing Civ. Realistically, all you would need to do is make their elephants more cost efficient. And you could do that by, obviously lowering the cost. I think another way to do it would be making them only take up 2 population instead of 3, thus allowing you to have more elephants total on the field. But right now they just don't have the tools that you need in FFA to be one of the more competitive civs.
Yep. Which I think that's about it for them.
Yeah.
They're kind of limited, which is their defining factor. Which does bring us up to something with a similar issue. The Civ English. They
Yes.
are a one-trick pony.
It's a good trick, to be fair. They are all about archers and turtling as
Yep.
far as their military goes. So you will need to use their network of citadels, both defensively and offensively, as anyone who's been tower rushed by England would know. And longbows are very good at sniping enemies. And once you hit Imperial Age, their volley ability lets them do ridiculous amounts of damage, but it is one note. And that particular note is pretty easily canceled out by a wide variety of options.
Yep. And they do have the passive gold, but it's not a lot of gold. You will see a lot of civs have equal, if not better, passive ecos than them, especially even in the gold department. They do not have anything that makes their army very powerful outside of their network of citadels. While they do
Yeah.
have some decent men at arms and archers, they don't even have the best ones. So I think in terms of their positioning, I think they're just a C tier civ for FFAs.
Yep.
Maybe if they had passive stone, they could go up, but
I
it's hard
mean,
for them.
I think if they had passive stone income, they would become S tier.
Yep.
So thank God they don't. But yeah, with
Yeah.
the way that their Civ is designed right now, it's very simple to use, very straightforward, very beginner friendly. So if you're a newer AOE4 player, or if you are just struggling to figure out the ropes of this game, because it is a very complicated video game, English is definitely a solid civ to pick. You will rarely be the first player killed if you pick England, but you will also rarely be the player to take home the W if you are England. Not
Yep.
impossible, obviously, just less likely. And so they are the first of our more straightforward, more beginner-friendly civs. Our next civ, the French, is also in that sort of new player-friendly, very straightforward, linear play style, but this time with cavalry as their focus. And you're a French main, right? Right, Dandy?
Yep. French and Jeanne are my two main civs, especially for FFA. With French, as you said, they're very straightforward. You get knights and you get arbaletiers. They can field a defensive army or an aggressive army, and the cost is pretty manageable actually, despite them fielding more expensive units due to their keep influence. They have two big things to note on, though. They have Guildhall, which is an incredible FFA landmark, as it gives free resources over time. That does get bigger exponentially to a certain degree, which allows them to get stone, which is probably the most important resource in the game, especially when you are going for something like a wonder victory.
Mm-hmm.
But they also have one of the weakest ecos in the game on average, if not the weakest eco in the game, because they get no bonuses outside of trade and guild hall. So if they're ever stuck in a corner, they are weakened heavily. With that in mind, with I would say about average military in terms of its effectiveness and cost, with the fact that they do get stoned but bad eco, I would put them in the B tier right next to the Abbasid.
Okay. Why would you only put their military as average? Considering how oppressive royal knights can be.
The reason for that is because about a third of the civs in this game can have knights that trade better than theirs. Rus have better knights. You're gonna see the Order of the Dragon have better knights. You're gonna see obviously something like Zushi have better knights. So their knights do not win all their fights. Then the most common army type you see in an FFA is Spearmen Hand Cannoneers, which hard counters the French, and French tends to go Red Palace as well, so they don't get their culverin from their other landmark. So they don't even have a good way to stop anti-blob
Siege
artillery, which
equipment.
means
Hmm.
yeah, so they tend to lose their own hand cannoneers and just range units as well. And they have the weakest minute arm and infantry base army in the game. So they have no grinding ability.
Right. And yeah, as someone who fights French a lot because of the nature of the FFAs that I play, yeah, I think B tier is pretty solid. Guild Hall is scary, especially if you let a French player with the Guild Hall boom in a corner. That said, any player who's allowed to boom in a corner without any sort of pressure is going to be scary, and a lot of our other civs are going to be scarier than endgame French can be. They just can't quite afford to produce endless amounts of knights, which are really their best unit by a wide margin. And yeah, I think that deservedly puts them in a B tier. Not quite, not better than Abbasid. Abbasid are definitely a better performing civ than French overall, but better than Byzantines. And
I would
our
agree.
yeah, our final straightforward linear civ is the HRE, and where England covered archers and French covered cav, the HRE cover infantry, and they do a very good job with infantry spam.
Yep. With a plus heavy bonus to their men at arms, have the ability to have their prelates buff their men at arms. They can put in a men at arm army, which is very cost efficient, and it'll beat or at least trade evenly or not horribly against basically every army type. They do
Mm-hmm.
have culverins, which is a big deal in FFAs to avoid losing your blobs or your Death Stars. They do suffer from one major issue though, and that is that their eco is relic dependent. They need the those relics to really carry them into late game,
Mm-hmm.
which means that they are a one trick pony. They are probably more than likely just going to go Aachen to Regnitz, and that is going to mean they're going to go for those relics and with men at arms because they don't get any of their armor bonuses to their cav or their spearmen. So I think they suffer heavily in an FFA format, but their strengths are very efficient. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, they are a C tier civ.
Okay. See, I would put them at a B tier personally. I think that being able to spam out men at arms and having men at arms that are going to generally out trade any melee composition that they come up against puts them in a pretty strong position. You are correct, though, that they are very relic dependent on their late game economy. They have a great, like, their prelates being able to inspire villagers is great in the early game, allowing them to get a very fast castle into regnates and relic control. But the prelate support falls off fairly heavily after that. And once you hit castle, you're usually better off using prelates in your military than as an eco bonus.
For
And
sure.
without that eco bonus, uh, HRE eco is pretty poor. They do have culverins though, so they are. I think you mentioned that they have culves, which makes their infantry blob very durable and very cost efficient. And for that, I would actually be inclined to put them in a B tier rather than a C. I think you're going to see them just generally perform a little bit better than the other civs in that tier.
All right.
Uh,
Well, that puts us next up to probably what is now the most popular FFA civ at this
yeah.
time.
Most popular, most feared, most either loved or hated. Generally hated, I think. It's Japan. And they win. Like,
Yep.
joking
They have
aside, they're good.
they have the most adaptable military in the game. Their cav beat French knights, especially if they have a bannerman. They have crossbows on a mountain unit that, once again, with the bannermen, are just as good, if not better, as any normal infantry crossbowmen, but now they're mobile. They have one of the top three, top four best infantry with the samurai. They basically have it all when it comes to military, especially once they hit Imperial Age and they can get the free siege with those Zutsus and the like. They
Hmm.
don't do bad in that, and then obviously their eco. They have the shrine where they can get basically unlimited gold and wood every 4 minutes. That gets boosted up a little bit more. So you're going to see them scale infinitely in a long-term FFA. They have a strong military, and they have no real weakness besides they don't have like a trade boost. But with free relics, they don't need it.
Right. Um, I would actually argue that they have one really big weakness, and that is building sniping.
Yes.
If they have a Mongol neighbor that they can't keep out of their base, and that Mongol neighbor is able to continuously burn down the forges that have the Yorishiro in them, then their economy sucks.
Yep.
Like, they have great food income, but everything else about their late game eco is entirely dependent on the Yorishiro infinite scaling.
Yep.
So if you can keep that at a manageable level, then you will do very well by just out resource trading the Japanese. That
Yep.
said, it is very difficult to maintain a constant raid on Japan in an FFA setting. What will likely happen is that politics will turn against the raider and put them as the major target, allowing Japan to go back to booming and cackling in the corner. And because of that, and their very strong, very well rounded military, I think they're S tier,
Agreed. I think they are probably the easiest one to put in the S tier.
right? Yeah, they definitely are. Um, and next up, in terms of our ranking and also civs that everyone loves to hate, we have Jeanne d'Arc.
Yep. Jeanne d'Arc, she is everything French wishes it was. She has the ability to get a minute arm that is actually the best minute arm in the game, allowing her to actually go into a grind fight.
And
She
that's the level 3 Jeanne
Yes.
choice, right? Okay, so
Yep.
it's not just their base men at arms.
Yeah, their base men at arms still suck. You want to use the Jean's champions.
Okay.
On top of that, she is a hero character that can heal inside of battle, because obviously that is always historically accurate. Everyone knows that Jeanne could just magically heal.
She
She
also
can
summoned
also,
cannons.
yes, she can summon a cannon
Hmm.
or summon seven military units out of the ground as if she was a necromancer or something.
All
She is
historically accurate. Yes.
correct.
Hmm.
So basically, she covers the weaknesses that French has, meaning that she has very few weaknesses. The only one being eco, which for me puts her in S tier.
Yeah, and even the eco weakness can be mitigated somewhat by the fact that you can make cheaper villagers. It doesn't
Yep.
improve their gathering rate, but it does mean that they cost less, both to boom and to recover if someone attacks you. And yeah, like she has everything that French has. And they're already considered one of the best FFA civs. But she doesn't have the weaknesses that French
Yep.
has. And yeah, I agree. This is another very easy S tier, in my book,
Yep.
for sure. Next up, Ilalu.
Ilalu. Yep. We have the Malians. Probably one of the more unique civs for this game. They are the glass cannons.
Yep. They are the least played Civ of the game as of the last time that I looked at AoE4 world stats for Civ by pick rate. They are definitely the least seen by myself personally, so I can anecdotally attest to their low presence. And they are they are a civ that plays more different than any other civ in this game. Everything about how Mali works as a civ in AoE 4 is different compared to the other civs. Your army composition is designed to hard counter your enemies, so you rarely have a all-purpose military, except for Sofa hand cannons. That's going to be
Yep.
your only all-purpose, and their economy is almost entirely based on passive generation from their pit mines and from their Grand Fulani Corral, which means that you make less from your villagers than any other civ. But to compensate for that, you also have less population space dedicated to villagers than any other civ.
Yep. With the passive gold from pit mines and the cows and all that, their eco is the best passive eco. They do not have any villager gather rates though that are special, so you are reliant on that passive eco. But if you're playing Malians, you're playing Malians for the passive eco and for their adaptability in combat, if nothing else, which is
I think you
powerful.
mean you're playing Malians for Ilalu. But
Oh,
I
my
agree.
mistake.
Yeah, the fact that their economy is so strong with the passive income, it allows you to sustain a war of attrition that almost no other civ can sustain.
Uh,
Your passive food means that you can print out warrior scouts all day because those warrior scouts only cost food. And while they are going to die in horrific numbers, you are never going to run out of them, and thus allow you to have a wall of bodies to protect your valuable units. And they can, eventually drag down opponents who, just run out of health.
They grind and they grind hard. If your ending statistics do not show you with the most units lost, you're not playing Malians correctly.
Right. Another nice thing about Malians is because they have, because of the way that their army composition works, you only need access to either wood or gold in order to have a strong military outside of siege. Obviously, you need wood for siege. But if you don't have access to gold, you can rely on Danso and archers. Those will be a very cost efficient unit composition. Obviously, it won't be as strong as a gold-heavy army, but it'll actually trade well as far as resource goes. If you don't have access to wood, then you have sofa and hand cannons, or sofa and warrior scouts, or pure warrior scouts to throw into your enemies. And those are also extremely cost efficient. So they will win as long as they have enough time. They will win basically any war of attrition.
Yep. For me, with all that in mind, including the fact with one landmark they can get passive stone to a small degree, I would put them as an A tier FFA civ, as long as the person using them knows what they're doing.
I would agree. Like, you don't need much to get Mali into an extremely strong position. You just need to get into Castle Age and get your Fulani Corral up and running. You can use whatever military you have to secure gold, using whatever resources you have available, whether it be food and wood or food and gold. And yeah, once you've got your passives up and running, if you can get trade, you will be able to just drain the coffers of any opponent in the game. Just be careful of getting 2v1'd and be careful of your opponent's landmark sniping, especially your corral. Those that will cripple you.
Yep.
Next up is Mongols, a civ that I straight up really don't know how to use, but I think you've played them a fair bit, right, Dandy?
Yep. In terms of FFA, they're probably my second most played civ. And the way I would view them is similar to Malians, where they have a very unique playstyle, but whereas Malians is focused on their military, Mongols as a whole just play differently. Due to the way their eco works, they do get resources from destroying buildings, and they don't have walls, so they can't defend their villagers. So their defense is their offense, and their eco is their offense. So, with that in mind, though, there is two very important facts with them, and one is that they are the only civ besides French that gets very effective passive stone, and they have the ability to wonder without stone. So all their stone goes to defenses, aka their cannon towers, which with the recent change to the game where their towers are buffed, they have one of the scariest wonder defenses in the game
It is.
overall.
It is disgusting how good a wonder defense Mongols can get if they end up going for a wonder. Another thing that's disgusting with Mongols is the fact that it's almost impossible to landmark snipe the little buggers.
Yep.
The fact that your entire base can just pack up and move means that unless you can deliver a hard killing blow right away, then you're not going to find their landmarks. And a lot of
Yep.
experienced Mongol players will specifically pack up at least one landmark and hide it in a forest or hide it in a corner to make sure that they cannot be eliminated from the game.
Yep. Their only real weakness is their military, which does is not one of the stronger ones in terms of a grind fight. But because of the fact that if they ever fight efficiently for them, they're getting resources to replace those units, and they will just wear you down. And they can disrupt ecos like nobody else with some of the best rams in the game too. Suffice it to say, for me, they are an S tier civ between Japan and Jeanne.
Yeah, I would agree. S tier right in between Japan and Jean. Because like even though they do have like even though their military is weaker unit per unit than most other civs, you just can't kill them. Like they will almost always find a way to rat and reboom and come back with a vengeance. And like you had said before, with their economy being sustained by fighting, you are like you want to be out and aggressing to make money, which
Yep.
no other civ can do that. So yeah, I think they are another S tier.
Yep.
Next up is Order of the Dragon, which are kind of like Jeanne. They're kind of HRE but better.
Yep. They do what HRE does, except just more efficiently, but with fewer numbers, actually. They have the best villagers in the game when it comes to gather rates.
Mm-hmm.
They can get the relics just as well, despite not having a very good Aachen. Their Aachen currently only really buffs their food gather rate from all the testing, so it's
Oh,
very hard
right.
to use. But they do. They just have so much going for them when it comes to their vil potential and their early military, especially. They can, if they can't get the relics with their prelates, they'll get you with the relics with the
Right.
prelates.
Yeah, exactly.
uh,
Their military is slightly more difficult to use, because you're bundling two units together with duct tape and calling them a super unit. But it means that certain army compositions for the Order of the Dragon are going to work out a lot better than they would with any other civ. Also, because they're not so reliant on the Aachen into Regnitz play, that allows them to go for other landmark options and other play style options. Mine work, for example, is basically the default, whether you're booming or aggressing, because of the bug with Aachen and the fact that the Mindwork unique technologies that are available in Mindwork are so much more impactful than they are with base HRE. And then Burgrave. Being able to produce your your infantry units for 30% cheaper, much more impactful on Order of the Dragon than it is on regular HRE. So you have more of a build versatility than their vanilla counterpart.
yep. And with that in mind, they have one of the best infantry units in the game, if not the best infantry unit in the game, with the Lance Necks. Those things can kill even Imperial Guards. They can kill French Knights. They can kill Japanese Knights. They can kill anything as long as they're alive. So, in a minute arm blob supported by monks, as long as their culverins can destroy things like Revolquins or Mangonels, they can win every fight.
Right. Um. Yeah, I kind of feel like all of that puts them into an A tier, maybe. Like,
I would say a high B.
what holds them
They
back?
are the thing that holds them back is that any rating done on them, their villager numbers going down hurts them exponentially. They do suffer, though, heavily from the low military numbers, meaning they cannot be in multiple places at once. It doesn't sound like a huge deal, but in an FFA where you could be backstabbed at any point in time using a mainly infantry army, if you get backstabbed, you are dead. There is no deleting your military and just producing a new one because that
True.
alone will kill your eco.
Yeah. Yeah, you can
They're so
almost never
expensive.
afford to do that. So, yeah. Yeah, that's those are good points. So yeah, I think with that in
Upper
mind,
B tier
upper B,
for me.
not quite as good as Abbasid, but would you rank them above or below French?
I would put them above French because their
Okay.
aggression allows them to be more sustainable.
Gotcha. Yeah, that sounds good. Speaking of sustainable aggression, Ottomans. Um,
Yes.
you would probably think of them as throwing out those Dark Age spearmen, but they have a lot more variety to offer than just the military school rush.
Yep. They are probably the in the top two or top three for best late game military. The Great Bombard spam is near unbeatable. There's only a few civs that can fight it efficiently, if at all. And even then, their free military unit saves a lot on eco. They do have some weaknesses though, that they are trade reliant for their eco. So on a map like King of the Hill, they will suffer horribly. But free military is free military. and if left to their own devices, they will have one of the strongest militaries in the game.
Yeah.
And they can use vizier points to get them that gold and stone eco bonus, which is also very helpful.
Yeah, I
So
think
I
that's
would,
usually what one. I think that's usually what your first vizier point is spent on.
Mhm.
It's rarely used for either of the other two options. You might grab the imams, but that's not until later. Yeah, they are obviously very vulnerable before Imperial Age. Great Bombards hard carry the Ottomans, in my opinion.
Yep.
So if you can get them before the Great Bombard spam cometh, then they are going to be floundering. But once the Bombards come out, the whole lobby kind of needs to unite against them, I think.
Yep. For me, they are definitely a high B tier civ. Um, I wouldn't personally put them in the A tier, but if you do let them get to the end game, which is obviously what we're kind of looking at, it puts them in the A tier, probably equal to Malians.
Yeah, and because we're mostly talking about post-imperial age, I think that more than justifies them being in the A tier. You're like I get why you wouldn't want to, why you would might want to put them down into the B tier, but with the other civs kind of taking attention away from the Ottomans, with people kind of forgetting about the power of the Great Bombard spam, that's leading to a resurgence, and I think that's going to justify an A spot
Yep.
for the Ottomans. Next up, we have Rus, one of
Good
my
old Rus.
right? They're one of my favorite civs, even though I don't play them very much. They're just a really fun civ to play, in my opinion. They just don't have a whole lot going for them in an FFA setting, I think.
Yep, they do have the passive gold, and they can do passive gold very well. They have the ability to buy stone very efficiently if they're using the tickets. They have a lot of tools, but they suffer kind of in the same way Delhi does, where they have landmarks, and once they get those landmarks, they are tied into a playstyle. Like, once you pick your Imperial landmark, especially, you're
Oops.
either defensive or you're aggressive, and it really changes how you're going to play, and it doesn't allow you to change after you've picked.
Right.
Uh, so I think with that in mind, though, they do have a rather decent military. Like, bare minimum, they have an efficient military with good passive gold that makes them definitely a contender in FFA and keeps them from being at the bottom. But for me, they are a C tier FFA civ, as much as I hate to say it.
I know, right? I want to put them higher, but I think you're right. C tier feels like the best place for them. You had compared their landmarks to Delhi before. The big difference I think between Rus and Delhi landmarks is with Delhi, uh, you only have the only time that you have a real choice in your landmarks is Castle Age, whereas with Rus, you can make an argument in every age for picking one landmark over the other.
For sure.
There are certain landmarks that are going to be uh, more commonly picked because they are going to perform better generally, but it's not like Delhi where if you pick one landmark in FFA, you made a wrong pick. Like,
Yep.
you can make an argument for Kremlin, you can make an argument for the High Armory, which you can't do with Delhi.
Nope.
That said, like, they don't have the yeah, what like you had said, once you've picked your landmarks, you're locked into a certain play style. If you pick the Spaskaya Tower, you are more or less locked into a more defensive play style, because you don't have the high armory bonuses, or the high armory bonus technologies that will enable a better landmark snipe win condition. And yeah, their army is just not cheap enough to sustain in a prolonged war of attrition, the way that almost every civ above them can sustain a war of attrition.
But a special shout out though for them for the Streltsy on the walls. Streltsy on the walls are amazing, perfect, never change.
Right. Just maybe do a team FFA if you want Streltsy on the walls.
Yep.
And last but not least, oh, I'm sorry. Did you have some closing thoughts on Roos?
Oh, just in relation to you saying them being in teams, team them up with a or not a Mongol, a Japanese or a Jeanne team, and you are going to see a deadly combination. Like the Streltsy paired with the Jeanne keeps or the Japanese like military, you're going to just see an unbeatable little wall there. But
Right.
moving on, obviously.
Well, we don't have far to move. We are at our final civ, which is the Juicy, or more accurately, Jushi's Legacy.
Or sushi if you're hungry.
Right. And I think they are basically China but better.
Yep. They do suffer from not having as many early game options as China, which means they're a little bit easier to kill pre-castle, but their late game military is top 2 in my opinion. Like there's or at least minimum top 3, though it does suffer from being heavy gold cost.
Yeah.
You were looking at their great bombards, which are not obviously the Ottomans' great bombards, but a special technology they can get that allows their bombards to have splash damage, which are equal to the Nesta B DPS. Plus, obviously, they can knock down buildings faster. Then they have Imperial Guard, probably the most expensive unit in the game in terms of like an actual infantry or cav or whatever. But it wins every 1v1 fight with another unit.
Yep. And it doesn't matter whether that unit is a cav, whether it's a spear, anything. Like it's going to win. I think I think they can win a 1v1 versus camels. I don't remember off the top of my head. I know the camels take the W in a blob fight, but I don't remember off the top of my head what the 1v1 looks like with that
The
particular matchup.
it's very close when fighting camels because of that nerf to their damage, but their HP pool just carries them through.
Okay.
Uh, in a 1v1, they definitely win the camel fight more often than not. Obviously, there is things in the game that can cause an issue, including pathing, where for some reason a unit doesn't attack for 2 hits in a row, but that's not what we're looking at, obviously.
Right.
We are looking at the fact that Zushi has the strongest knight in the game, and they have some of the strongest siege in the game. But its weakness is its gold cost.
Yep. They are even more gold hungry than China is. And that like that gold starvation problem that China has is one of the things that kept them out of S tier. And Jushi has it even worse.
Yep.
So, they also have like your Imperial Guard and area splash damage bombards are you're going to be your two research choices from the Jushi's library. And if you don't pick those two techs, you are handicapping yourself in an FFA.
Yep.
Which means that if you are a if you haven't watched this video or if you haven't played enough FFA games with Jushi to know that those are the two techs that you pick, they are just going to perform measurably worse than if you pick those two specific things, which means that they are much more prone to user error than like our top tier civs are.
The one thing that is to note about Zushi is that right there with Malians, they are the only other military that can field a fully food military with their monks.
Oh,
Those
that's
monks
right.
are that makes them scary. So no matter what you do, you have to take them out before they hit the Imperial Age, where they have their granaries set up, or a
Yes.
massive gold income where they have a enough gold to sustain their overpowered military, but it is a risky bet trying to even get to that point.
Hmm.
And their eco is very reliant on some level of luck or just high level of skill, which for me keeps them at A tier, but with S tier military capabilities, if not like above anyone else.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
not to be slept on.
Yeah. No, I would agree. Anyone who's faced off against the Imperial Guard Jushi knows how ridiculously oppressive that unit is and how hard it is to deal with. But it's vulnerable before the Imperial Guard mass gets up and running. It's also super vulnerable to being whittled down. Like once you start getting rid of that Imperial Guard mass, the you cannot replace it if you're Jushi.
Yep,
And that means that in my mind they cannot make it to S tier, even though everything else says that they should be there.
yep. Uh, and obviously that means that when you're fighting against them,
Grind them out.
just understand, yeah, you can't just have a solid win. You have to be playing like the English style of fighting, where you're just trying to win the battle slowly. It's a rough fight, but it is manageable. So
It's
it
not about
it
winning the battles, it's about winning the war when you're fighting
yep
a Jushi player. Like, you are going to be losing every army that you send at them, but eventually, as long as you can sustain the military that you are losing, you will eventually win that war because Jushi cannot sustain the military that they lose. So,
yep
that's how you beat them. It'll probably require a 2v1 against Zushi, but it can be done.
yep. And I think that's about it with Japan, Mongols, and Jeanne being our S tier. Zushi, Malians, China, Ottoman A, Abbasid or the Dragon, French, HRE, and Byzantines in B. C being Rus, Delhi, English, and sadly for the Ayyubids, though being
They're good.
probably one of, if not the best 1v1s, they just don't have the FFA style of play.
Yeah, which is unfortunate for them, fortunate for the rest of the world. Thank you so much, everybody, for making it through the video. If you got here, I can only assume that you liked this video. So please head down to the bottom and click that little thumbs up button. That would mean the absolute world to me. And if you have any questions or non-hateful comments, please leave them in the comments section below. And if you want to know more about why we put the civs in the rankings that we did and how we kind of came to our conclusions, over the next few weeks, Dandy and I will be making a video series that kind of deep dives into each civ in an FFA scenario, as well as kind of a more overall how to FFA video for the huge influx of new players that we've seen.
Yep. If you do have hateful comments, as John said, don't leave them here in the comments. Just come send them to me. I'll happily have a conversation with you.
All right. Well, have fun with that, Dandy. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys all in the next video.